All right, so hi everyone. My name is Liam Malone. I'm also known as the reason why the coal bioshelter was lit up pink for a few months this year. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you especially to the Hampshire faculty and staff for organizing this showcase for us in what sometimes feels like the worst of the timelines. Today, I'm going to talk to y'all about my Division 3 work, which has varied but is best described as entrepreneurship in indoor agriculture. So I've lived in Holyoke for almost 10 years now. I transferred to Hampshire 2 years ago in my mid 30s from Holyoke Community College. And Hampshire felt like the right kind of academic environment to transform my life and my career by helping me identify ways to tap into the potential I see in Holyoke for sustainability and innovation. And the area of sustainability I've focused on primarily is local food systems. So these headlines are taken from major news sources in 2018, highlighting some of the issues we experience with regularity in regard to our food system. Of course, now in light of the current global pandemic, these issues have magnified and increased, with state and federal governments slow to help the industry adapt to a new normal. Farmers are destroying massive amounts of food because traditional market relationships have begun to unravel, and consumer buying patterns have shifted wildly. The disruption to the global food web is widespread, and food insecurity is skyrocketing everywhere. This is a huge issue that will take work across many different governmental and market sectors, but I've always tackled the problem from the ground up, as it were. So my goal has been to start here in Holyoke with our food insecurity issues while leveraging the advantages the city offers for sustainable innovation. So looking with these looming issues in mind, I've focused on these two areas specifically during my time at Hampshire, both prototyping a vertical hydroponic system while simultaneously strengthening my entrepreneurial skill set. Today, I will be highlighting much of my work, but certainly not all of it. And for those interested in learning more about this journey that I've been on and following it as I continue to develop the business, I invite you to check out my website, uachholyoke.com, or follow me at UAC Holyoke on most major social medias. So while I was researching hydroponics early on, I learned about aquaponics. Aquaponics is a system in which you raise fish to convert their waste using nitrifying bacteria from toxic nitrite into the nutrient nitrate, and feed that to plants, which in turn filter the water and return it to the fish. I focus specifically on a type of hydroponics called nutrient field technique, or NFT, in which nutrients normally found in soil are dissolved in water, which is fed across plant roots. Plants are grown in a substrate, such as clay beads, peat, or in the case of my work, stone wool, which is a material made from superheating basalt rock and spinning it like cotton candy. These fibers are then compacted into sheets and then cut into cubes. These cubes are then placed in net cups within the hydroponic system to allow roots to access the nutrient solution as it passes through a hydroponic channel. Growing indoors without sunlight, supplemental lighting is often used, and typical hydroponic and traditional vegetable growing is done horizontally, which doesn't fully utilize the full area of a space. So I focused on how to design a vertical hydroponic system that could utilize more area of an industrial or manufacturing space, typical to many of the buildings that I see in Holyoke. So first, I designed a plan for a 3-stage aquaponics system, which was approved by the Natural Sciences faculty and staff, and won grant funding to construct it from the Harkness Fund for Innovation. Each stage would be one main fish tank and a vertical grow wall, and it would be expanded as we saw repeated successful operation. Once my proposal was funded and approved, I began to prepare the coal bioshelter for the experiment. So starting in the spring of 2019, I began clearing out the 4 500-gallon tanks of plant matter and plastic substrate from previous students' divisional work on the second floor bioshelter so they could be moved downstairs. I then concentrated on cleaning and preparing the first floor bioshelter to accommodate the project. And as summer began, I started to piece together the various PVC fittings necessary to connect the system components. In the middle of summer, I began to construct the vertical wall. And once the columns were constructed, I built the reinforced frame that would hold them. As the semester began, the tanks were moved to the first floor, and I was able to connect all the system components together. In October, my aquaponic compatriot, Robert Mueller, caught us a variety of local Massachusetts freshwater fish, which were added to the system. And at our peak, we had about 48 fish across 5 species of bluegill, catfish, and perch. After a few weeks of observing and recording water quality and nutrient levels, we discovered we could sustain much more plant life with the nitrate levels in the system. So we repurposed some vinyl rain gutters that we found in the bioshelter to be used as an additional 70 planting spots by affixing them to the backside of the wall. Our seedlings were not fully ready to be transplanted at the time, so we hastily gathered some plants from a local greenhouse and added them to the back channels. All in all, things were going pretty well towards the fall of 2019. All the while, I was developing the experiment, but also I was hard at work trying to refine a business idea. The first idea, the first idea I had was to leverage the emerging marijuana industry and combine cannabis cultivation with vegetable growing in an aquaponics facility. Basically, by growing a cash crop, I could use the profits to offer low to no cost food products packaged as a Blue Apron or HelloFresh style cook at home meal. I had the opportunity to first pitch this idea to the Grinspoon Entrepreneurial Initiative annual banquet. It was around this time I took the feedback from multiple sources. The idea itself was perhaps too complicated, and also researching the cost to enter the marijuana industry, I realized there was a significant financial barrier to entry. Thankfully, I was in the right environment to learn about how common this is, this pivoting or changing one's business idea. So I spent a semester as a student fellow at Springfield's Valley Venture Mentors, a nonprofit area entrepreneurial incubator. And I was fortunate enough to work with the Hampshire Seed Fund as well. It's a student-run, faculty-advised group to fund Hampshire students and alums on entrepreneurial projects. This gave me the opportunity to somewhat sit on the other side of the table as a funder, not someone seeking funding. In the summer of 2019, I participated in a second pitch contest and was introduced to Holyoke E4All, a nonprofit entrepreneurial support organization. At this contest, I won third place and held a giant check with my name on it for the first time in my life. Pretty cool. Through the end of 2018 into 2019, I began a cooperative business boot camp night course that was offered by Springfield's Wellspring Cooperative, which run many area businesses, including a hydroponic greenhouse in Indian Orchard. The boot camp offered a rare opportunity to explore cooperative business structure and use what I learned to develop my own co-op, which would reflect the labor values I believe in. My relationship with Wellspring has been a game changer, and I was even able to intern at their harvest greenhouse over the summer, working very closely with their general manager, Dohan Allen. This past winter, I was selected to participate in the Holyoke E4All Business Accelerator. This free year-long program has connected me with mentors who work directly with me on developing my business, and the accelerator was truly just that. It accelerated my idea and made me answer tough questions that moved me closer to making this business a reality. So during the summer of 2019, while I was researching properties available in Holyoke, I discovered the historic Richardson train station in Holyoke's Ward 1. Built in the 1860s, the property had sat vacant since the early 90s. The station and its baggage annex building sit on about 1 acre of land nestled between Holyoke's upper and lower canals. The Holyoke Redevelopment Commission actually conducted a study in 2010 which focused on potential reuse for the property. This is a rendering which proposes an indoor farmers market for the first floor. My idea was to repurpose the building under the name Harvest Station Cooperative. The basement would be converted to an aquaponics facility with multiple vertical grow walls and main fish tanks. And though this all looked great on digital paper, as it were, a large part of my entrepreneurial work has focused on who exactly my customer is. I conducted many rounds of customer research focused on my business idea for the Richardson station, one of which was conducted on election day. You would be surprised how willing people are to speak with you when you aren't talking about politics. The questions centered around residents' feelings about Richardson Station, what they would like to see happen with the building, thoughts on cooperatives, food buying habits, and general feelings about what the city needed to improve food access generally. I also conducted some online surveys in the winter to get a sense of customer expectations for the produce, their produce's origin and shelf life, and what kinds of produce people bought. Using the data from the surveys, I developed a few customer personas. These personas synthesize respondent data into an avatar, which represents common themes or trends among respondents. Personas help gather a vast set of data into a more tangible idea of who the customer is and what their life is like. All was looking very well in the later part of 2019 on both the entrepreneurial and indoor agriculture fronts. Then December kind of took a turn. Some of our fish developed a bacterial infection, which we were able to treat, but treatment options were limited due to the fact that we were what chemicals you can use for aquaculture don't necessarily correspond with what you can use in a indoor agriculture setting. Then the morning after, I spoke with an alum, Josh Goldman, who runs an international aquaculture business, and he strongly advised that I think very carefully about trying to enter the fish business. We had a pump malfunction and lost most of our fish. It just so happened to be the day before my 31st birthday. Additionally, I learned that the Richardson Station had been sold to a local developer. Now, I don't necessarily believe in coincidence, but the timing of all these events led me to yet another pivot. And before winter break, I would wind the aquaponics experiment down and decided to design a strictly hydroponic system. I want to real quickly give a sincere thank you to my classmate, Robert Mueller, who worked with me from day one on the aquaponics project and is a fantastic human being. Throughout my work, I have been using the app 1 second every day to chronicle snippets along the way. This video focuses on the first phase of my work at Hampshire. Enjoy, and we'll pick back up with the more recent work after the video. This'll be fun with a box full of beads. Let's find out. Ooh, golly. All those irrigation tubes. That was a thump on this side. Timer. The aeration. Flow rate isn't quite current, well below our blue line. Whee! $2 fix. Two. Yeah, the thing DIY. Big boy. We're gonna use the whole saw and then 5. Works pretty well. Whee! And we're back. So winter break gave me an opportunity to focus in on what I learned from the first version of my prototype and apply it to a second design with a number of improvements, including the addition of these PVC double Y pieces, which were much more compact and double-sided. I wanted to design something that could scale to virtually any space. So I designed something that was much more modular. I applied for and was awarded a second Harkness Innovation Grant, and I began sourcing materials and constructing version 2. I used thicker 2x6 framing for added stability and bored a hole in the top of each column of the top framing for each of the columns to be able to get irrigation to. Once I ran the main irrigation line, I split it so that each column would have 2 lines, ideally creating a backup. And a crossbar was added on top of the frame to hold the reflectors and LED lights. Once assembled, The wall has 16 columns with 7 spots per side for a total capacity of 224 plants in an 8-foot wide by 4.5-foot high space. Here is version 1 and version 2 side by side for comparison. Campus shutting down put me in a pretty precarious position where I couldn't continue to access the facilities on campus, and I had to move the system off-site. Thankfully, my landlord was able to give me a space here in my apartment building so I could use that. Unfortunately, the environment in the basement is very conducive to algal growth on the stone wall. So I've had to develop a way to keep the algae from growing by blocking as much light to the cube's surface as possible. Though algae is not uncommon when growing with stone wool, it can sap nutrients meant for plants and is generally unsightly if you're trying to sell your products. So despite the relocation of hundreds of my plants in many 5-gallon buckets to their new home and the algal development, I was able to successfully have my first harvest at the end of March. Despite numerous pivots and setbacks, these actually have prepared me for the development of my current business model, Uprising Agricultural Cooperative. Referring to both the vertical nature of the hydroponic system and the revolutionary nature of cooperatives to transform economies, the name exemplifies all that we do. Synthesizing my customer and market research, I developed updated customer personas to reflect my distinct customer segments. This one highlights the end-use consumer, the retail produce manager, the produce distributor, and finally the food bank coordinator. These customer personas typify the needs of these distinct customer segments that I've identified and will guide me in tailoring my products to their individual needs going forward. I also began developing conceptual facility models that can be scaled to fit virtually any industrial or manufacturing space. This first attempt, for instance, is for a 10,000 square foot facility. As I refined my work and continued research, I developed a more realistic model for a roughly 4,000 square foot facility. Developing these conceptual models has helped me take into consideration multiple facets of commercial facility operations. Depending on the size of the facility, I can now estimate utility costs, growing input costs, labor requirements, as well as develop accurate startup and operational cost estimates and facility production benchmarks. Now that you've listened to me speak about this more recent work, here it is wrapped up in less than 2 minutes. Let me tell you. Find the links.
With Sean.
This would have been. I would not have thought all of this work possible in 2016 as I stepped foot onto a college campus for the first time in over a decade. I would like to sincerely thank and acknowledge the following individuals and organizations for all that they have done for me in the last few years. I can't accurately express just how much your support, encouragement, guidance has changed the trajectory of my life. I sincerely wish my father was here to see the passionate and important work I've been doing in the last few years, because both he and my mother raised me to be compassionate, empathetic, and inquisitive in all that I do. And I see the work I do now as a reflection of those values instilled in me to truly make this world a better place. As I mentioned above, I've chronicled all of my work at uacholyoke.com and on social media at uacholyoke. I welcome you to take a look if you would like to learn more, and certainly feel free to ask me questions. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. I'll now take some time to address any questions that you may have. Thank you very much, Tammy. Tammy, you and the entire EPEC committee were instrumental in helping me try and develop this. Thank you. This question is for Brett. Can I talk a little more about next steps for this venture? Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Brett. Brett has been on my committee for the last 2 years, and really reminds me of these questions that, take answering. Really, the next steps for me are focusing on how I can turn this into a commercial venture, certainly. But first and foremost, I want to be able to address the glaring food insecurity needs that we have by trying to develop a way to produce as much as possible for local food banks. So if that's through grant funding or donations, I want to be able to use this system and the technology to be able to serve the greatest need first before I potentially move into something more retail or distributor focused. This one is from Bella. What am I growing? I am growing primarily leafy greens. They perform best in a hydroponics system because you have very little room for roots, for instance. So you can't do anything like a tuber. We're not going to do beets or potatoes or anything like that. But leafy greens especially do very, very well within the confines of a hydroponic system. So I've been doing different types of lettuces as well as herbs, and those grow very rapidly as well. So basically, I'm able to produce a consistent amount of harvest within about 35 to 45 days. Let me see here. Let's see, there's a question here. Is a system like this expensive to run? As a matter of fact, no. When I moved the system here to my apartment complex, my landlord put a wattage meter on the outlet, not necessarily so he could charge me for the power used, but just more of a curiosity. And based on those calculations, it takes about 43 cents a day to be able to run all of the LED lights, the pump, and the seedling lights. So scaled up, of course, this is much more expensive, but my primary 2 inputs, that being water and electricity, are extremely inexpensive here in the city of Holyoke. With the cheap renewable power that we have from the dam and solar power in the area, the commercial electric rate is extremely, extremely low, and we have the 3rd lowest water rates in the state. So I think with these 2 advantages, coupled with the fact that there is so much ample industrial space that isn't being utilized right now, I think the startup costs especially, and then the subsequent operational costs are much, much more diminished than perhaps they would be in a different place. Let's see, there's some in the chat, so I'll grab these. Let's see, this is from my Aunt Liz. Hi, Liz. How did I determine the ideal LED light spectrum? This is a rabbit hole of debate within both LED manufacturers as well as hydroponic growers. There is a tremendous amount of research out there as to the right spectrums to grow with. Many manufacturers assert that the only usable, quote unquote, light that plants use, because they convert red and blue during photosynthesis, because they only use those spectrums, that those are the only ones that are necessary. But there's been increasing research into the red and green spectrums, which are sometimes left out of these more commonly available lights, to see what the impact of adding those in is. From the studies I've read, it seems as though the green and yellow lights are actually able to penetrate canopy. So that way your kind of fledgling or smaller leaves, which sometimes get shut out by the larger ones, are able to access more light. The problem with adding the green and yellow to LED fixtures is the fact that it takes more energy to produce that light. Just based on the nature of the diodes themselves. It's not as efficient. It doesn't produce as much light as, say, red or blue, which are easily produced with less energy. There was a second part of that too. Also, cost of living is quite high in Massachusetts. Yes, it absolutely is. And that's part of the reason why I want to make sure that, you know, healthy, locally produced food is accessible to people. I know that we have an abundance of farmers markets and community gardens, but I still think that there is a tremendous need, especially here with a school system that desperately needs, you know, a source for good, healthy food. We have a hospital here. We have a number of outlets that I think could really use the freshest produce possible. So those are kind of the next things I'm looking at after food banks. Let's see, there's a question from Leslie about whether the system works inside or out. You can absolutely run a hydroponic system outside. If I wasn't on a 4th floor apartment, I would absolutely have the first wall that I built outside. It's, of course, exposed to the elements, so you do have to mitigate, you know, when you're timing your pumps, and if you know, using any kind of outdoor lighting doesn't necessarily work. But hydroponics in general is traditionally done in traditional greenhouses that you might see. A lot of that work is done in greenhouses. Let's see. I think that is all the questions. Thank you, Naya. Naya was, I mean, I really, if I have a few minutes and there's no questions, I have to give another thank you to the staff and faculty at Hampshire. Hampshire has been, I think, the perfect place to be able to come in with all of these wild ideas and yet be able to find the funding and the support and the connections to be able to make it a reality. It wasn't until this year that I really felt like I could call myself an entrepreneur, and that is largely due to the support and help of the faculty and staff. So I don't know if I would be here without Hampshire, and I look forward to trying to make sure that an institution like this exists for people like me who really want to make a change and make a substantial change in the worlds we live in. Thank you all very much. I guess I will call it here.